Hi, my name is AJ, and if you are new here, I am a designer and rug maker. I like to make videos teaching people the craft of tufting. That is a form of rug making using something called a tufting gun. Today I'm going to be answering one of the most frequently asked questions that I get, which is, what is the difference between the cut pile gun and the loop pile gun? The cut pile gun is the AK1 model and the loop pile gun is the AK2 model, and I got both of these from Tuft the World, also known as tuftinggun.com. Today's video is actually sponsored by Tuft the World. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I talk about Tuft the World all the time. They are essentially a one-stop shop for me when it comes to all of my tufting needs. Not only can you get a really high quality, guaranteed to work machine from Tuft the World, but you can also buy some supplies such as tufting fabric, backing fabric, and some really incredible quality yarn. You're also going to get a top-notch customer support experience. If you want to place an order, you can use code MAGIC15 for 15% off of your order. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so these two machines from Tuft the World are both low pile guns versus something like the AK3, which is a higher pile gun and has a lot more adjustments that you can do. For most tufters, especially people who are just getting into it, either the AK1 or AK2 are going to be a really good option because they are more affordable. They're pretty light, they're only about 3 pounds, and they're very simple just right out of the box. Let's start with the cut pile. This is the gun that I use most frequently. I love the finished product that I get with this machine. What makes a cut pile is this machine has scissors that kind of live here within the gun, and these scissors come out of the nose and cut the yarn every time the yarn is poked through the fabric. To thread this machine, we take our yarn and we thread the yarn through this top hole here. We're going to thread it through this small hole that you see here on the nose. Now, whenever you are threading your machine, make sure that it is turned off or unplugged. I have this little threader tool, which I recently constructed out of stretchy plastic string because I lost my metal wire. Thin wire could work, but this seems to work just fine for me. Placing this through that hole in the nose, thread it through just like that. When we press on the trigger here, the nose is going to push the yarn out and then it will cut the yarn. So as you can see, we have a lot of pieces of yarn that have been cut. That's what we're working with a cut pile. Now here we have our loop pile gun. You'll notice a few things right off the bat that are different. For example, this uses a belt instead of the gear. You'll also notice that the nose of the gun is significantly different. This nose does not have scissors like the cut pile does, and therefore requires that you use scissors to manually snip the yarn after each line, which I will demonstrate a little bit later. The mechanics are essentially the same. You've got your on-off switch here and trigger, just like the cut pile. One big difference is how you thread this machine. We're going to place the yarn again through this hole at the top. Again, we want to make sure that we turn the machine off while we are threading. We're going to put our threader through this nose here, underneath this metal piece through. So it's now on this side. I'm gonna grab yarn and then pull the yarn through that nose. To demonstrate, turn on the machine and pulling the trigger. You'll notice that this is still one long piece of yarn. It's all still attached to your feed. That's essentially how the loop pile works, where it's creating loops instead of cuts. That is how you thread those two machines. So I am here in front of my frame, which is the starter kit frame from Tuft the World. I've got 2 yarn cones, which I am going to feed into my machine. A couple more things to note is that I am using this tufting fabric here from Tuft the World. This is the gray version, which I don't often use unless I am working with a loop pile machine. I have found that this gray fabric is better for the loop pile machine. But first, let's demonstrate the cut pile. So once you have your frame set up and your tufting fabric very, very tight, then you can go ahead and use your gun. All right, let's take a look here. As you can see, we have all of these strings. I just like to pull out of the fabric so that I get a really good idea if there are any holes that I'll need to go back over with my gun. But this is the back side and this is the front. So as you can see, each piece of yarn is trimmed. The yarn kind of splays out, which I will go through and trim, but it does create your pretty typical low pile rug appearance. Now let's give the loop pile a try. We're gonna need to grab some scissors. This gun does not have built-in scissors, though I really wish it did somehow, because one of the biggest pain points is that you have to snip your yarn every time you make a line. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm just gonna have these scissors here available so that I can go up and snip when I need to. Being very careful not to shove these scissors into my fabric, which would cause a hole. There are some things to consider in terms of technique that you'll want to be aware of. This gun in particular, I recommend moving kind of slow and preventing the gun from like staying put in one place and chugging the yarn, because that will likely result in a hole of some kind. So you just want to be really careful that you are making sure to move slow and to prevent the gun from getting stuck in one place. The use of this gun is essentially the same in terms of, you know, applying pressure, making sure your fabric is really, really tight. So yeah, let's get going. Okay, as you probably noticed, my technique is not as strong with this gun. With any gun that you get, there's gonna be a little bit of a learning curve, and it could take weeks for you to really feel like you're making very clean lines and that look really good. As you probably noticed, I was doing lines and snipping them, but you can also just rotate the gun, and that's something you can do with both the loop pile and the cut pile gun to maybe save some time. You probably want to prevent excessive needs to snip, so it might be a little bit easier to, you know, get used to rotating your gun. Let's take a closer look. I'm not the best at my loop pile technique. You want to kind of demonstrate with this line since it got a little wonky. As you can see, if I pull these strings out, it's going to pull this entire line. I can take my scissors and snip that. Yeah, you just want to obviously be careful. Okay, let's take a look at the other side. On the right, we have our cut pile, and on the left is our loop pile. You get a very different look, and I'm just gonna go in and snip. So you can make small snips to your loop pile at the end, but obviously you can't go in and, you know, do trimming like this, because that would create a cut pile finish essentially. But you can do a little bit of trimming and still achieve a loop pile finish. I'm just going to clean this up so it looks a little bit nicer. It's pretty interesting to me how the color even looks different, even though we used the same yarn. This is gonna give you your typical soft rug feel. This here, and especially because I'm using wool, it's definitely a bit more rough in its texture. It feels very sturdy. This one really feels soft on your feet and has nice soft rug texture. One more thing I want to note related to the loop pile gun is that I actually had to make a height adjustment to my loop pile before I could really use it. When it came out of the box, the pile height was very short and the yarn wasn't actually pushing through the fabric far enough for it to stay in the fabric. So I did a really simple adjustment to the gun. When it comes to determining whether or not you want to go with a cut pile or a loop pile gun, there are a few factors to consider. I think the main thing that you should think about is what kind of rug do you want to make. Using a loop pile gun allows you to do some really granular details that will be a little bit more difficult to achieve with a cut pile gun. And that's just because with a cut pile gun, the yarn on the other end is going to kind of splay out. I go through and trim those edges to clean it up and make lines crisper. But with the loop pile gun, you don't really have to do that because it's going to create a pretty compact finish on the other side, and therefore it's a little bit easier to do detailed work with the loop pile gun. Additionally, you can pair the loop pile gun with a punch needle. So if there were some very fine details you wanted to use, you could go in with a punch needle instead of the gun and do those details manually and then, fill in space with your gun. The second thing you want to consider after deciding what the finished look is that you're going for is workflow. Will you be patient enough to manually trim after each line that you make? That I think is an important thing to consider, which is why I continue to recommend the cut pile machine for beginners, because it's taking one step out of that workflow and it might make it a little bit easier for you to learn tufting. The things to consider are, one, what is the finished appearance that you're going for? And secondly is, are you willing to add that extra step into your workflow of snipping the yarn after each line? So that is going to be it for today's video. If you have any additional questions regarding the cut and loop pile guns from Tuft the World, feel free to drop your questions down below and I will do my best to answer them. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future tufting videos. I will talk to y'all soon. Bye.